Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Matteo Rinaudo, and I'm a senior developer advocate with the AWS CloudFormation service team. I've been working at Amazon Web Services, or AWS, for almost 8 years. And in my current role, besides being a coder myself, I focus on two main topics. The first one is building communities around CloudFormation. And tonight's installment, this session, is one of the many examples. And the other thing that I also do is being myself a developer like you folks, I work with developers in bringing back feedback around CloudFormation to my team so we can continue to improve it. Okay, so this is a DevOps forum, so I'm not going to spend time on what DevOps is, like people, processes, and tools. I'm going to make a big assumption, which is a very fair assumption that we all know what that is, right? And as part of the DevOps mindset, people, processes, and tools, that is one of these three branches or legs, that is processes and best practices. And one of them is describing infrastructure with code. All right. I'm going to make another assumption that we all know that this is a best practice, but by raise of hands, please don't be shy. How many of you believe that describing infrastructure programmatically with code is a great idea? All right. Awesome. How many of you use tools or services to describe programmatically infrastructure with code? All right. So this session is going to be about AWS CloudFormation. How many of you are familiar with AWS CloudFormation? All right, let's skip to the Q&A. That's great, that's great. Okay, so before jumping into CloudFormation, right, we all know that it's important to describe infrastructure as code, and when you talk to your internal, external customers, you're going to be saying, it's not important to do it just because it's cool, because hey, it's 2023, we want it to be describing everything in code, but there are real benefits. For example, when I treat my infrastructure with code, I'm dealing with code. This means that I can test it. This means that I can do a code review. I can ask a couple of peers to review my pull request that is making changes, right? I can audit what are the changes over time. I can, oh my goodness, there is something that is going on in production. Let's take a look at what happened 1 week ago. Oh, so you go into the source code repository, do a quick show of the history, and then you understand what the problem is, and then you can do a roll forward. We all know all of these things. And of course, it's predictable. You can test it. You can also do static code analysis to see if there are any vulnerabilities, or not vulnerabilities, sorry, so any configurations that are not the ones that you desire. And of course, it works at scale. And this is something that you can easily orchestrate with pipelines. So we all know all of these things. So let's talk about how you can use AWS CloudFormation to describe infrastructure with code programmatically. So AWS CloudFormation is a service that do you know how many of you, do you know how many years is CloudFormation old, roughly? Yeah, it's actually 12, so a little bit more than 12. So it's an AWS service that gives you the ability to describe AWS and third-party resources with code. So this means that, for example, you want to describe programmatically the configuration of an Amazon SQL storage service or an Amazon S3 bucket with code, and say, I want this bucket to have versioning enabled, or I want to use server-side encryption using the AWS Key Management Service or AWS KMS. You describe all of these properties in a configuration file or a file. It's called a template. And then you have CloudFormation realize that for you. So those are AWS resource types. So we can also build your own. So if you have an API and you want to describe the life cycle of your resources with CloudFormation, you can also build your own resource types. So this is what primarily you would use CloudFormation for, to describe infrastructure programmatically with code. And what you can do is you can also describe these resources and create the lifecycle these resources across AWS accounts and regions. There is a feature that it's called the AWS CloudFormation stack sets that allows you to do that with one single operation. And then, last but not least, there are ways for you to extend the way CloudFormation works. So besides provisioning resources, what you can also do is you can extend with CloudFormation extensions, literally, the behavior of CloudFormation. For example, you can create CloudFormation modules that give you the ability to encapsulate best practices into a self-contained module that you put it into a place that is called the AWS CloudFormation registry, which is an endpoint with which you interact within an AWS account or region and say, I want to submit this best practices module, for example, describes an Amazon S3 bucket the way I want it into the registry so that your users can simply consume it from the registry. So this is just an example of an extension. You can also build your own resource types, like I mentioned. And then last but not least, there is another feature that we launched over 1 year ago. It's called the AWS CloudFormation hooks. How many of you are familiar with AWS CloudFormation hooks? So it's a feature that allows you to create your own policy compliance controls. So before you are even realizing a resource with CloudFormation, for example, before you create an S3 bucket, you can create a hook. And today you can use Python or Java to say, I want to create a security control based on what my Cloud Center of Excellence or my CISO is telling me. For example, all my S3 buckets in my account, in my company need to have versioning enabled, they need to use server-side encryption using AWS KMS, for example. So you create a control that enforces all of these checks. So before you're actually going to create this resource with CloudFormation, you can engineer your hook to activate, take a look at whatever the configuration the user has specified in the template, and if it's not the one that you say, prevent, deny the provisioning. So you can do things like this. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to dive deeper into these things, but little spoiler alert, there is going to be a demo, and you see a couple of hooks that I built in action. Right. Any questions so far? Please don't be shy. We're all here to learn. Please. Just replay that in the microphone, please.
Yeah. Do you have hooks for the compliance?
So the question was, are there any CloudFormation hooks for any compliance standards like HIPAA? And no, not that I'm aware of, but there are a number of hooks in the CloudFormation registry built by third parties that might encompass, of course, not all the standards, but some test use cases or some use cases. So you can also use hooks built by third parties, but not that I'm aware of. Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions? Let's do this. All right, so let's see how CloudFormation works. So the first thing that you want to do is describe your infrastructure with code. And for that, you use a CloudFormation template. Actually, use more than one. And today, you can use two data formats, JSON or YAML. Initially, we only had JSON. Now, I think since 2016, we started to use YAML. I typically use YAML because I'm a human being. So it makes it much more readable. And what you do is you describe, for example, your S3 bucket, your Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud resources in a template. And then what you do is you interact with AWS CloudFormation. So you have this template stored on your machine or checked out locally. Or what you can do is you can upload it into an Amazon S3 bucket. You capture the URL of this object, and then you give it to AWS CloudFormation. So when CloudFormation, what you do is you create a stack, which is a collection of resources that you describe in your template. You can create a stack, you can update an existing stack, or you can also delete it to the provision of the resources. So whenever you're ready, you interact with CloudFormation. You can use the AWS Management Console, or the CloudFormation Console in this case, or you can also see the command line. You'll see that in the demo. And then whenever you're ready, you're going to be having all of these resources. So CloudFormation will attempt to create these resources on your behalf. And say, for example, in your template to describe an Amazon S3 bucket, you tell CloudFormation, create a new stack. And CloudFormation will look into that template, will look into, oh, I have an S3 bucket, and it will create that for you. So from now on, you're going to be managing the life cycle of that resource with CloudFormation. And now I'm going to pause real quick because there is something that I want to say. I think it's very important. It might be very tempting to say, hey, I created a stack, and I configured, I'm going to make a very simple example, an S3 bucket, and I forgot the versioning, described in my template. It might be tempting to go, okay, I'm going to go and I'll make a manual change with the AWS Management Console. So please don't do that for two reasons. One, this is an approach that is not going to work at scale. It may be in case, hey, it works in dev, but it doesn't work in the QA environment. Oh, that's because I made a change out of band and I forgot. So please don't make changes out of band, because this is not a best practice, right? And also, it might be in a case where, CloudFormation, when you update the stack, is expecting that resource to be in the state where CloudFormation left it, and then it might be into some cases there might be a little bit problematic. Okay, so please don't make changes out of band. All right, so this is a summary of the possible sections in an AWS CloudFormation template in YAML format. So we're not going to have time to dive deeper into all of these details, but let's do some quick exercise together. So all of these sections that you see here, except one, are non-mandatory. There is only one of these sections that is mandatory. Can you tell or guess which one? Don't be shy. I'm going to give a little hint. It's on the right side of the screen. I hear resources, and that's correct. All right, so we are using CloudFormation primarily to provision resources. So we require that you have a resources section in there with at least one resource, right? So all the other sections are not mandatory, but this session is also about best practices. What I would like to recommend as a fellow builder is to always use the AWS template format version, whereas version date is not today's date, is a very well documented value in the CloudFormation documentation. I just do that to be consistent. And then description, right? We are all engineers. If somebody is going to be inheriting an infrastructure, you want that engineer to see right away why this template exists, right? Description, and then parameters. This is a good idea to describe infrastructure once and deploy it many. For example, I'm describing the infrastructure for my API, for dev, QA, and prod environments. Of course, you want to make sure that all of these resources are configured the right way, because otherwise you're going to be in the case, hey, it works in dev, but it's not working in prod. But there might be some topic, properties that might change by lifecycle environment. For example, the prefix of a resource. So you may want to use parameters to specialize, in these cases, and also for other use cases. One other thing that I want to say, we're still like in the best practices train. So there are a number of AWS services that have a number of AWS service limits that not only exist to protect the service endpoints, but also to prevent that, for example, as a user, I would do an action that is not the one that I expect. For example, I would over-provision something. So AWS CloudFormation also has a number of service limits. And if you use your favorite search engine and you search for AWS CloudFormation quotas in the documentation, you will see which those are. So the reason why I'm bringing this up in this context is because there are a number of limits, for example, on the size of the CloudFormation template. So when you create a stack, for example, using your command line, which is what we're going to be doing today, the template that you are passing to CloudFormation as part of the create stack request cannot be larger than 51,200 bytes, for example. If you upload this template into an Amazon S3 bucket, the template cannot be larger than 1 megabyte. And today, it cannot have more than 500 resources in the template. But again, the reason why I'm bringing this up today is, even if these limits would have been like much higher than those are, do you think it's a good idea to put all of these resources for the entire infrastructure in one single template? It's not, for a number of reasons. Not only from an operational standpoint, right? Because at a stack that has a large number of resources is a little bit harder to troubleshoot should issues arise, right? And also, if we put our CEO or CTO thinking caps, right? Thinking strategically. In my company, for example, in a typical company, I might have a security team. I might have a networking team, a database team, an application team. Well, of course, this depends on the way that company is structured, right? So it might be a good idea to start saying, if I need to describe an infrastructure with code, with CloudFormation, how do I distribute my resources across templates? Have you ever thought about things like this? Is there like a law, or there are some criteria that you can use? One of them is ownership. So you can say, perhaps I can have a networking team that is going to own resources that are relevant to the network. And they say, we are the de facto owners of these resources, and we are creating these resources on your behalf, and we tell other teams how to consume them. So maybe you can have one or more templates owned by the networking team around the network resources. The same for database. For you have the database team that owns one or more templates for the database and so forth. So ownership, right? There is also another criterion, which is life cycle. There are resources that make sense to have in one template. For example, a blue-green deployment. Who's familiar with the blue-green deployment techniques? Okay. So let's take, for example, a simple API that runs on, maybe oversimplifying it a little bit, a load balancer and a fleet of instances, right? Running version 1. And then I describe these resources maybe with one CloudFormation template. And then what I want to do is I want to roll out to version 2 of this infrastructure. What I do is I will reuse the same template with maybe some changes to create another twin stack that is going to create the same resources, and then I'm going to deploy version 2, for example, of my API. So in this way, you see there are resources that make sense to group together, and there are also resources that change more often than others, right? I wouldn't, with this example, I wouldn't put anything like the persist data in it, because it's going to be a little bit more difficult to maintain. So using lifecycle and ownership as part of best practices. Any questions so far? Do you agree? Any disagreements or any experiences from the field that you want to share? All right, take it for everything. Okay, demo time. All right, so what I'll do is I'll show, let me see if I can show my editor. Okay, so this is a very simple template that I created that describes an Amazon S3 bucket with code. As you can see here, there is a property, bucket encryption, and I want to use AWS KMS as the server-side encryption algorithm. The bucket name, we haven't discussed about all of these things, but CloudFormation also has a number of intrinsic functions that allow you to do a number of things. For example, this sub over here that you can see with the exclamation mark, which is called the YAML short form. It allows you to concatenate some strings. For example, I'm telling CloudFormation, create a bucket whose name is resource name prefix. In this case, this is a reference to one of the parameters as an input. By default is my app. And what you can also do is you can also use regular expressions and other constraints to validate user input. Very important to do. I strongly recommend you to look into parameter validation for fail fast, right? Then what you can see here is another section on tags, because it's very important to tag resources, right? I hope we'll agree with that. There are many reasons why it's important. And in here, I'm referencing some input parameters. For example, ref. I'm reading what is the value that the user has specified, for resource name prefix. But if the user, when you create the stack, doesn't specify any value, I also have the ability to specify a default value that's going to be honored when you create the stack, not when you update the stack. So my app. Okay, and we also have a section with the outputs that are basically showing very quickly what are the things that you created, for example, as part of this stack. Now, what I'll do is I'll switch over to my terminal, and I will use the AWS CLI to create a stack. So in this case, I'm using AWS. It's this executable. CloudFormation is the name of the service, and then create stack. I'm passing in a stack name. If you go into the AWS documentation, we'll see the syntax for this. And then I'm passing the name. The stack is called test. Template body. It's called test-stack.template. It's the file that you just have seen. And this template cannot be larger than 51,200 bytes. I think we are good with this one. And then the AWS region that you want to use. In this case, I'm using USS1. So I'm going to do this live. And all right. let me switch over to the AWS CloudFormation console. So you can see here, see, test create in progress. So CloudFormation is looking into the input template that you have seen earlier. Can you see okay? Okay-ish. Let me put it a little bit bigger. See, like this. Okay. Better? Okay, so this is the template that you have seen. And then if we go into, actually, I need to put it a little bit like this. Okay, create complete. So CloudFormation has created the stack, and this means that it also has created the resource that I wanted to create. In this case, my app dev, and then all the other values that I put into the template. So has created an S3 bucket, configured the way I want to. Now let's go into the events pane here. So this is basically a history of what happened since when I created the stack. So CloudFormation saw that I want to create an S3 bucket. In this case, it didn't create the bucket right away because incidentally, as I mentioned earlier, in my account, I put two hooks that I built. I built one in Java and one in Python to do two different things. One, to check that a number of resources are using AWS KMS as an encryption method. And another one that all the resources are tagged the way I want with the tag keys and tag values that I want. So since I have engineered these hooks to be triggered in this case, what happened was the two hooks have been invoked. You can see here the first invocation. This is a sample hook. The code is available in GitHub in the AWS CloudFormation samples repository for the AWS CloudFormation organization. So this one is in Python. So the hook has been invoked to check that resources are tagged the way I want to. And this one, it's called AWS Community KMS Encryption Setting. This is in another repository. It's called Community Registry Extensions in the AWS organization. This one is a hook that I wrote in Java that checks that a number of resources are using KMS encryption. So they have been invoked. And for example, the KMS encryption setting, I can see right here. Perhaps I need to, okay, sorry. A little bit with the scrolling. So this one here was completed successfully. So it actually looked into the business logic of the hook, looked into the configuration, and saw that it was configured the right way with the KMS. And then the other hook looked into the configuration of the tags and say, oh, I've seen that the resources. You remember that the tags that I put into the resource type. There are the ones that I expect. And then after that, it started to actually create the S3 bucket. And we have an S3 bucket. Now, I'll show you a quick example. So again, we're not going to have a lot of time to dive into CloudFormation hooks, but I want to show you something. So if I go here into registry, activated extensions, privately registered, you'll see that I have the hook that I built right here. I'll show you the configuration that I put together. If a lot of things may not make sense because we don't have the entire background on hooks, but I wanted to show you. So I configured this hook to say every time that there is a resource, an AWS resource that supports tags, and this hook that I built supports it's a sample hook that supports over 600 resource types. Make sure that there is a tag called name, and the value for this name is alphanumeric, including underscore and the dash. The environment, it could be dev QA prod or an alphanumeric character. And then the app name is an alphanumeric character with the underscore or the dash. Now, I'll show you something. What if I go back here in the template, and as you can see here, tags. See, I'm referencing resource name prefix, which is a parameter input. What I'll do now is I'll update the stack, and I will pass a different value for resource name prefix. So the dot is not supposed to be an allowed character in the configuration that I put together for the hook that I engineered. So if I put a dot in here, what I'm expecting is that, on update, the hook is going to be triggered again, and it's going to deny that configuration for me. So let's see. Yep, update failed. So the KMS encryption hook still succeeds, right? Because we didn't change anything related to server-side encryption. However, the other hook that I put together, it failed. And it's saying, and this is an error message that I engineered to make sure that it's easy for consumers to understand what's going on. Oh, there is a tag with an invalid value, my .app. So this is just an example that basically shows how to interact with CloudFormation. And incidentally, I'm also showing you a little bit of things about CloudFormation hooks. So that concludes the demo. Are there any questions? Just want to make sure that I'm mindful of everybody's time. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. So what are the benefits of this over Terraform?
Of what, the CloudFormation or the hooks?
Yeah, CloudFormation. Yeah. Why would I choose CloudFormation over like Terraform? What are the use cases or benefits?
Yeah. So ultimately, the decision is yours, right? So in this talk, we're discussing about AWS CloudFormation, right? And if you're, if for example, I'm looking into using a service, an AWS service that integrates with a number of other AWS services, right? I will look into AWS CloudFormation, but again, the decision is ultimately yours. It's just that we're talking about CloudFormation in this session. So,
but are there like some does it run faster or some kind of any measurable benefits like besides just like can it do more things that like the Terraform can't, or like in terms of feature sets? Or
yeah, I don't have a specific answer. I think the most important thing is to look into what works for you ultimately at the end of the day. I would use for example a number of criteria to say I want to choose this tool, this tool, this tool, this tool, right? So I'm not here to say use this tool or the other, because again the decision is yours. But do you have any specific questions around CloudFormation or provisioning or?
No.
Okay.
Good talk.
Any questions? Yeah.
Maybe on a similar topic, like what if I have like a different type of cloud, not Amazon? Can I use CloudFormation for those? Let's say Google or some third party. How is it compatible, and how is it cross-platform? So can I use Amazon CloudFormation for anything except of Amazon? So
you use AWS CloudFormation in the AWS cloud.
Okay, can I use in GCP, like in
No.
Azure? No.
No.
So it's probably the case.
It's an AWS service that works with the AWS cloud.
I think this is, kind of, where you have to, just choose any other tools over CloudFormation. It's kind of answer to previous question.
Yeah, you can use AWS CloudFormation with the AWS cloud. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sure. Any more questions? Don't be shy. We are all here to learn. Please.
Is it possible also to get like the CloudFormation template from an existing AWS account? Like if I have some services that I set up manually, can I turn it into the template?
So from an existing AWS account, meaning deriving from a stack. So for example, you have this CloudFormation stack over here, and you want to see what is the latest template that you use to. There is an API for that, if this is the question that you asked.
No, I don't have even like a stack. I opened the AWS account, set up some EC2 instances, and I want to create, I guess, I want like do the reverse. I want to create a stack.
To basically create a template from an existing set of infrastructure. Is
that's
that
right,
or importing resources into CloudFormation?
That's right, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so if you have, for example, for the latter, if you have a resource that you're not managing with CloudFormation today, And we also have a list in AWS documentation that tells you which resources are compatible with this import. What you can do is you can import a resource in the purview of CloudFormation, if this is what you were asking. If this is what you were asking.
You guys, yeah. So I can answer this question maybe. Like,
Yeah. So
I might be wrong, but yeah, just some ideas. You guys have a partner. I mean, Amazon has a partner called Firefly. It's a startup. What they basically do, they just scan your infra and produce infrastructure as a code, and you can use it going forward.
So the question was that not just importing, but just looking into a number of resources, picking them up, and then importing into CloudFormation.
Yeah, let's say you manage service provider, you go to any environment, you don't know anything about that, right? You have just one guy, and you need scan it and basically produce code, right, based on that. So you can use Firefly, for example. I'm pretty sure there are many other kind of competitors in that space. But on Amazon Summit, which happened 3 weeks back, I think Firefly, they had a boost. So pretty impressive.
Yep. Thank you. Any more questions before we go into the end of the presentation? I know we're going a little bit. All right, so let's sum it up. Just want to make sure that we're mindful of your time. Describing resources by lifecycle and ownership, describing them into different stacks, in the different templates, and then test early and fail fast. There are 2 open source tools that I wanted to share in the event you want to evaluate them. The one is called the CFN lint, that gives you the ability to give you feedback right away as you're writing a CloudFormation template. For example, yes, I'll show you real quick my IDE. So if I specify let's make a, let's induce an error here. Let's see if okay, so maybe you can see here at the bottom, the text is very small. In this case, I've integrated CFL lint into my editor, and I get feedback immediately. Hey, you're using an unsupported resource type. And so you basically get feedback right away into your IDE, and you also can run it using the command line. So it's very important to say this is going to save you a ton of time. And then there is another tool that's called TaskCat, and this one allows you to create 2 or more, for example, CloudFormation stacks out of your template in more than one region. And this is useful, and I recommend you to look into things like this, because you may have cases where you want to port your infrastructure in more than one AWS region, and then you have the ability to say, hey, my template is portable across regions. So something for you to start to evaluate. We didn't discuss about this, but I strongly recommend you to look into cross-stack references. Remember describing the infrastructure by ownership. You have the networking team, then the security team that maybe creates IAM roles, and then the database team. So you have different teams creating different resources across different stacks. How do you collate them? Right? So there are cross-stack references is one of the techniques that CloudFormation gives you the ability to export a resource from one stack and import it into another one. So I recommend you to look into cross-stack references for that. Of course, don't make changes out of band. Please, please, please don't do that. Don't do that. And validate user input. You can also use the example that we have seen earlier for the template parameters. And then last but not least, the CloudFormation documentation. You can look it up into using your favorite search engine template reference. You're going to find, for example, properties to use for a specific resource type that you want to describe CloudFormation. And then there is another resource that I wanted to show. It's the AWS CloudFormation workshop. It has over 30 labs that you can use with your own AWS account to start doing hands-on practice. There are also labs, for example, that give you the ability to use, one is called Architecting Your Templates, that gives you the ability to use cross-stack references and so forth. There is also another one that we launched recently with a new intrinsic function that CloudFormation has to create loop-like structures with a language extension called FN for each. So you can also look at all of these things in practice. And then Also look into the CloudFormation language discussion repository. That's the last link on this slide. So the CloudFormation team is working with the community with the open discussions on how we can continue to improve the AWS CloudFormation service. So, and there are a number of RFC, requests for comment, like interactions in the issue sides of this repo. So feel free to take a look. If there is a language feature that you would like to add, feel free to put a thumbs up emoji, or you can even create your own RFCs, right? And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, and have a good night.